Todd Connor, welcome to Living Off Rentals.
Kirby, this is so fun to be with you. I'm excited to talk.
Yeah. This is a very special episode for me because I've got on the podcast today one of my biggest mentors and examples of leadership over the past decade now, or almost decade, I guess. And from my perspective, great leadership is rare, and you can read about leaders, but when you get to observe it up and close, it's pretty life-changing. So Todd Connor has been an extremely inspirational person for me, and he's the author of a new book. It's called Third Shift Entrepreneur: Keeping Your Day Job While Building Your Dream Job, which is much of what this community, this Living Off Rentals community, is doing in real estate. So I think this book is absolutely perfect for this community. Perfect timing right now. A lot of people aren't satisfied with their day job. They want to build their dream job. But they don't know how. So I'm excited to go into that with you today. But first, I'd love to just share real quick how you and I met, and then you can fill in a little bit about your background if that's all right.
Sure.
So I got out of the Army in 2011, and I started my first business because I thought, the way you do it is you get out of one thing and you jump headfirst into a business. And, I thought I had prepared myself and realized how little preparation I had done in the scheme of things, and struggled for several years from 2011 to 2014. And then that's when a couple different veterans reached out to me who knew I was in Chicago, and they said, "Hey, have you heard about this thing that Todd Connor is starting at 1871 called Bunker Labs, which basically is a nonprofit that helps veterans start businesses?" And it sounded great. So I went down there to check it out, and it started as like 30 or 40 of us in a room, Todd Connor up in the front, facilitating discussions and just bringing in subject matter experts, just creating support for veteran entrepreneurs who are growing their businesses. And all of a sudden it was just like a breath of fresh air, because I thought I had to figure it out on my own. I was grinding it out for years, and we had made money, but not really much profit. Didn't really know what I was doing wrong. Thought it was unique problems to me. And now I'm surrounded by so many other veteran entrepreneurs who are, have a similar background, and we're all going through the same struggle together. And it was just incredible. So I stuck around, and you couldn't get rid of me for several years. And then finally, Todd asked me to come on as a COO a few years later, because Todd's like the ultimate visionary and needed somebody to kind of complement that personality. So I came on not knowing, very intimidated and not knowing what I was doing really. But that became my full-time job while I was a third shift entrepreneur, growing my business still. And I learned so much, and I got so much stronger as an entrepreneur because I had that job and was surrounded by others. We kind of had a culture of the third shift entrepreneur there. And it's just been life-changing for me and my business and my family. So I appreciate all that you've done, and I'm really excited to dive in with you today.
Wow, Kirby. Well, thank you. That's quite the setup. I just have so much respect and gratitude for you and who you are and what you role model for the community that you're building. And Taryn, and I mean, we have so many threads that we could go down of the enmeshed nature of our lives. And I think I will say this, which is, Bunker Labs for me is like being the hair club for men. Like, I'm not only the founder, but I'm also a client. I built a community that I needed, and I built and centered the conversations around the conversations I needed to be having. And so it's at once a tool, hopefully, for impact and growth for others, but it is absolutely also selfishly a mechanism for my own sort of growth and development and understanding. And so I come at this as like feeling so privileged to have witnessed so many other people like you and others start things, grow things, start things, quit things, restart things. It's all these nonlinear pathways that I've come to understand, which is the basis for the book and so many other things. But suffice it to say, I continue to be a student of of this process of,
Yeah.
of how people start things and bring them to life, which I just find incredibly fascinating, and frankly underdeveloped as a conversation. And we can get into like why that is and what it is.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah. And so the book is on the shelf behind me. You can see here, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see it right there. But um, so I feel like looking at this book, I haven't got through it totally yet because I'm more of an audio listener, and I'm a slow reader. So we got to talk to Wiley about releasing this on audio as soon as possible. But um, it feels like in today's Shark Tank society, this book feels kind of counterintuitive. Like it's like less sexy, than throwing caution to the wind and trying to be the next Elon Musk. So why this approach, and who did you write the book for?
yeah. Well, I'll start with who the book is for,
Okay.
and then I'll talk about why I took the approach I took. The book is for people who have constraints in their lives, and which is, by the way, like the vast majority of us, right? So if you are a Harvard dropout whose parents are wealthy, then you can find Mark Zuckerberg's story relatable. If you are not, then it feels totally unrelatable. And unfortunately, in this country, for lots of reasons, we've conflated venture-backed, technology-backed, or technology-enabled scalable businesses with entrepreneurship. Like we've made it one and the same. If you ask people, well, who are the big entrepreneurs in this country? We kind of go to the Silicon Valley sector and those sort of, we go to unicorns. And the reality is that is a very small subset of the kinds of businesses that get started in this country. The vast majority of businesses that are going to be created in this country, and by the way, we're in the middle of potentially a nice boom that's coming, are going to be people that are buying real estate and operating as single site landlords. It's people that are going to open restaurants. It's people that are going to start a second gig. Maybe they have a day job, but they want to do some. They work in HR during the day, but they want to do some leadership development coaching at night or on the weekends. It's people that are teachers who want to occupy their summer months by building a summer camp and running a summer program. It's people that have a passion for physical fitness and want to open up a CrossFit gym. It's people that have a passion for nature and want to start beehives, right? So there's just all kinds of things that people are doing, and I tell dozens of stories in the book about the kinds of things that people are doing, who are starting things. And I think that they don't see themselves in the literature. They don't see themselves as candidates for Shark Tank. They don't see themselves as as being interested or appropriate for Y Combinator, and they don't need those things, right? And this is the big point, is like, this is actually what the vast majority of aspiring entrepreneurs are doing in this country. They're building things, they're starting things, and they're never going to be appropriate for venture capital, and that's okay. And in fact, the worst thing that you see is these kind of bootstrapped entrepreneurs trying to apply to technology accelerators, and they don't realize that that's not even the appropriate model for them, that that's never going to be a fit for them, and that it doesn't need to be. And so I'm really wanting to celebrate, it's not even the underdog. It's frankly, it's the vast majority of entrepreneurs that are starting things that don't, and will never hit the lens of a VC firm. They'll never sort of make it onto Shark Tank, but they're happening in communities across this country. They're important businesses. They're very profitable businesses, and people are starting them most often part-time. And that's really the point. The third shift entrepreneur is the person that has a first shift, which is their job. And I encourage people to keep your job. I mean, this is just like fundamental. Keep your job. Keep that financial stability for yourself. Your second shift is your family. It's your life. I would never say like stop spending time with your kids in order to start a business. I would never say quit your job in order to start a business. I think that's terrible advice. It's ridiculous. It's not smart. And then the third shift is how you creatively recapture time, space, energy for the thing that you want to build. And that can maybe sound like a third job. It doesn't have to be. But it's a discipline more than anything. It's a discipline, and it's thinking strategically about your time, your attention, your expertise, and how to place those things together in such a way that you can build something and build it from the place that you're at. And so, yeah, I was playing with calling it the 44-hour work week as a like a poke on the idea of a 4-hour work week. That this is sort of like the yes and approach. But if you understand entrepreneurship, there's lots of research about this. Smart entrepreneurs keep their job because it de-risks the risk of starting a business. It gives the business more time to breathe. It gives the business more time to understand product market fit. It gives the business more time to sort of step into what its potential can be. And so if there's a way to keep your job, slow roll the business, that's a smart way to do it. And I've done this, for myself, several times, and we can talk about that. But that's, and real estate's part of that picture as well. But yeah, I'm on a mission to sort of declare, scream, encourage. You don't have to quit your job to start a business, and you can be an entrepreneur without a technology-backed startup.
Yeah, that was one thing I didn't understand when I was first getting started too. Everyone's like, you got to be raising money and working on your pitch deck, and I realized that didn't apply to my business really, and I wasn't a VC type business. And but one thing that stood out to me, I've been doing a lot of market research. One of your observations in the book is run experiments, and I've been interviewing a lot of people from this community around, because one thing I've been working really hard on is creating this program to help people get their first vacation rental. And one theme that keeps coming up from people in this community is that, they're almost waiting for permission to get started. Like, it's like they are kind of concerned about either it's the image of, my LinkedIn profile says that I'm, an accountant. So why, this is going to look really weird if I'm a real estate investor too, or I start something that's totally different. So I need to keep my resume and my LinkedIn profile, looking, all tied together. And so people wait for so long until they think that they're going to eventually come to this point where they're able to pull the plug and jump into the next thing. But I think this book is kind of a roadmap for people as to how to transition into that thing that keeps burning in the back of your mind. So if someone's listening to this and they're in that position where they're working in a job similar to the Matt character in the book, that they're working in a job that, it's not lighting them up, they've got a passion for something else, probably real estate investing, if they're listening to this podcast, what are some of the first steps that you recommend someone take in that position?
Yeah. Well, the book lays out 12 specific, I don't call them steps, I call them observations. Because I think that some of these things can be evidenced immediately, and then other things you're gonna have to actually go do some work for. But the first thing is figure out what you're interested in. I use the word obsessed because I don't think that that's too strong a word, but it's something that just continues to linger in your mind. It's like, hey, we'll keep it on real estate. Hey, I live in Chicago, and West Humboldt Park has some really interesting 3-unit buildings, and there's a lot of development happening in that community. I keep thinking about it. I keep observing it. I keep wondering. I find myself scrolling on Trulia. That interest is relevant. Don't ignore that, because that time spent scrolling, that time spent contemplating, if you believe the idea that it takes 10,000 hours to sort of accumulate expertise, that is an investment towards that 10,000 hours, right? So that thing that you've got tumbling around your mind is worth paying attention to, because that is the kernel of what you sort of find interesting or are obsessed with, and that's always the sort of the genesis for this. The next thing is, I think people kind of create these over dramatized moments of announcements for starting a business. Like, no one cares, like scrap all that. Like, you do not need an announcement. You do not have to change your LinkedIn profile to buy a property and make it a vacation rental. So that's number one. It's like, I actually don't, I think people get stuck because they think about some dramatic Facebook announcement. And partly it's because people are doing that too often, and it kind of role models that is a thing. Now, if you're doing something like selling a book or a consumer business, then like that, there will be a time and place in which that's appropriate and necessary. And there is a discomfort that comes from that. And the only answer to that is lean into the discomfort. And it's like the first time you do it, it's awkward. And then you realize two things. Number one is it gets less awkward every time you do it. And number two is most people just aren't paying attention. So those two things, I say that as encouragement of like, people build up some crescendo moment of announcing on Facebook that they're going to get into real estate. And then it's like, they get like mom likes it. And then like their old like high school science teachers, like, sounds good. Like, how are you? So like no one's really, so actually what you find out is most people aren't paying attention. And that we don't need the big crescendo moment, and we make it bigger in our minds than it has to be. And that also the more we do it, the easier it gets. I also think it's about keeping the narrative like other centered. So if it's about, look at me, here's what I'm doing, that's hard. And I never feel authentic in that place. If it's, hey, I really have an amazing vacation property in Michigan City, Indiana. If you're coming with your family, you really should stay here because I feel confident that it's a beautiful place. It's a good deal for what it is. And I know that you'll have a good experience. That's not self-serving. That's other benefiting. That's other serving. Right. And so yeah. I think I have to check myself because there's, a lot of what, I do with, the bunker or the book is like promoting these platforms, but whenever I'm other centered, like I feel good. And if it's ever self-centered, it doesn't feel good. Right. And so, yeah, I think we've got to move. Sometimes entrepreneurs fall in this trap of like, I'm getting ready to announce something and that feels very me-centered, but shift that around. Well, who's going to benefit from the thing that you're announcing? And if you figure that out, then it's easy. And I would even argue like moral or required that you get out there and do that because the world needs what you're offering, right? Like it's the work that you're doing, Kirby, which is, it's not about Kirby, it's about other people that want to make a living off of rentals, right? And that's a real service to people. And so with that mentality, I think it's easier to lean into it and step out there and do it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it kind of ties into observation number 9, which is observing the pull. And that's when there's this inflection point, which this kind of stood out to me as, helped me understand this is it's when observing the pull is basically when it switches from managing, you're now all of a sudden you're managing the flow of inbound, and that's replacing running experiments. So previously you're running experiments to try to see what works. And now all of a sudden there's all this flow of inbound that you're managing, and that's replacing running experiments because it's working and you're doing something for others that they are sharing with their friends. And so I think, observing that, and I think that's a great test for people who have an idea or a dream and they're not sure, is this going to work? Well, run the experiment and then observe the pull. So for someone, I guess, who's a little bit further along than the last person we were talking about, who's just trying to kind of get started with it, but maybe they've been doing this for a while. They have some rental properties. They've built some progress while they're at their job. How do they know when it's time to cut the cord? Because I get that question a lot, and it's very scary to cut the security of the 9-to-5 job. So when is that inflection point there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and I'll recap to say that, yeah, I do think that the entrepreneur's job is like, figure out what I'm interested in, pursue that thing, do it for free, just pursue the pure intent of the thing. And so if it's real estate, like get involved in real estate, go to meetups, get involved in that community, go visit properties, help someone else buy properties, help someone else renovate properties. Like that, I call that your internship. So build yourself an internship. How are you going to get smart? The time to get smart is not after you announce that you're going to create a business. The time to get smart is before you do that. And then through that discovery, that internship, you learn what's possible. You create some experiments to sort of see what works. One experiment could be managing property. Another one could be buying a property. Another one could be working for someone else to help them acquire property. You figure out what you're good at through that. You figure out what other people need. And then you wait for like the pull. Sometimes entrepreneurs, it's like, I keep putting it out there. No one's responding. I just got to keep pushing harder. It's like, no, maybe no one wants what you're offering in the way that you're offering it. That has to be, we, the entrepreneur, have to bring it forward. And then the market is going to, at some point, tell us we want that, or we don't. And by the way, I put things out there a lot that people like, the market's like, nah, I'm not interested. I'm like, okay, like that's okay. So we have a job to show up, bring it halfway to the marketplace, and then we have to listen and be intent on here's what the market is wanting from us. And then I think be smart in kind of following that direction. I think good entrepreneurs are very obsessed with like the problem that they're trying to solve, but very also flexible on the solution that they're going to design. So you might be interested in real estate and you think maybe it's 3 units, maybe it's 12 units, maybe I'll be a content thought leader, maybe I'll provide kind of loan servicing. I mean, there's different ways to get after that. So it's about being flexible enough to say, look, I'm really interested in real estate, but I'm flexible on how I get there. And I think it's holding that dichotomy. It's not the dogged entrepreneur. I think this is a false narrative. It's like the dogged entrepreneur that just makes 1,000 cold calls and then like in order to get to that one yes. I think that's dumb. I'm like make 10 calls. Everyone tells you they don't want it. It's like the smart entrepreneur asks, but what would you want? Right? As a tag on to every one of those 10 calls. Well, what would make you excited? And then you begin to sort of shape and morph your offering based on what you're learning people do actually want. And so I think sometimes entrepreneurs get in their own way because they're not flexible, they're too rigid. And they've got in their minds a narrative of like, this is what it requires to be successful. And I don't actually think that that's true. So to your point, when do you know to quit? Sometimes entrepreneurs will say, I can't afford to quit my job. And by the way, my first point is I really respect that. I think you keep your job as long as you can. Worst case scenario is you've got 2 income streams, you're pretty busy, but like that's not a bad outcome. You're probably pretty happy, which probably makes you a pretty good parent, pretty good spouse. So I don't think that's a problem. But I think if it comes time where you're thinking, look, if I have something going on the side and it's secondary income and it's happening, and maybe I do want to quit, I ask people, to actually like just do the math. Like what's the number? Because people often say, I can't afford to quit. I'm like, well, what's the number? It's like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, how much money do you need to live? And they're like, well, I mean, I don't know. It's like, well, then answer the number. I mean, is it, $30,000 a year? Is it $150,000 a year? Is it, those are different, so actually get to hard numbers. And it's funny how many people have as a kind of like a boogeyman income, but have not actually done the math. And I don't think it has to be terribly sophisticated, but I do think that it's like back of the envelope, this is how much I need to live. And it's looking at, I think, your cash flow, and just saying, I can or I cannot afford to do this. But yeah, I think some things just become bigger in people's imagination, and money is one of them. And it's like it's not actually an emotional question. It's just do the math. What do you need to live for your lifestyle, and then can you afford to do it? That's actually a very answerable question.
Yeah, absolutely. You've been a third shift entrepreneur in many endeavors. One thing that has always impressed me, and I think it's probably because I'm not so much this way, is that you can handle so many different things going on at once, and your decision making capability is incredible. You handle like you get information and you make a decision and then move on to the next thing, and you probably don't even realize that you're doing it, but it decreases that time that's required. Like for me, I go and mentally stew over it for quite a while and want to analyze all the different angles, and then I make a decision. But you just, you make a decision and move on. And so you're able to handle a lot more. And I think that's allowed you to be sort of a third shift entrepreneur, maybe a fourth or fifth shift entrepreneur, since you've got so many different things going on. But one of those things that I want to dive into, because I think this audience would be really interested in, is your real estate third shift entrepreneurship. You've been running now Emerson House, which is a property you bought several years ago, and you converted this property into a sort of a B&B and venue. And it's impressive what it's turned into. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the background, how this came to be. What was the inspiration for buying this property? And then we can get into some of the details of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because if you think about like real estate for Andrew and I, for my husband and I, has probably been more like when I talk about it a lot, and I don't even know that we've, and there's better experts and better books on this, but it's always been a core part of, I think, and for a lot of people, how you'll generate wealth in this life is through real estate. And so, and you know that better than anybody, but my first property when I got out of the Navy in 2004 is I came back in about a 3-flat in Humboldt Park in Chicago. And then, kind of understood what it meant to be a landlord, and then left that and then moved to DC and ended up, other things in between, bought another condo and then moved to DC and was renting in a 4-unit building. And then it came up for sale out of an estate sale. We exercised TOPA rights, which is Tenant Occupancy Purchase Act rights. And we ended up purchasing this property at a real discount because of DC laws, in order to not sell to current renters, you have to prove that you have like a much better offer in hand on the market that you therefore can deny the current renters. So it's basically heavy renter preference to purchase any property. And so then we took that and then we acquired that property and then we sold it at a huge kind of margin compared to what we bought it, and did things with that. And then Andrew and I bought using the GI Bill. And I found this was kind of crazy, but we used the GI Bill to purchase another multi-unit property back in Chicago that was our home for a number of years. Which, and I don't know that people realize this, but if you served in the military, you can use the GI Bill or the VA home loan, the VA home loan to purchase property. And there's like, I don't think any spending cap on the price of the property. And so we acquired that. And so multi-units in Chicago are a common thing, 3-unit buildings. And so that's always been a little bit of a strategy in DC as well. And there's always been policy benefits that we've, I think, captured as a result of that as well. So whether it was TOPA rights in DC or whether it was the VA home loan, which is a fantastic sort of wealth generation opportunity for military veterans, those things are available and at play. And it's about timing and being willing to kind of, move and take advantage of it. So it's been a part of our story. And then we bought this property in Northwest Indiana because we're here because of, I'll go back to the framework, like an obsession, us saying, look, Northwest Indiana is so cool. It's an hour from Chicago. I don't know why more people don't come out here and enjoy the nature and enjoy what's available. And so we bought this property that was an old bed and breakfast and spa. We got it for what we thought was a very good deal relative to kind of a Chicago market and so forth. So that obsession was there. We acquired the property. We knew that we had a conservative scenario around just Airbnb-ing it, which we knew would cover the cost of it. And then we had a more ambitious scenario and we constructed some experiments. Experiment 1 was I really wanted to host small group retreats. We knew that there was maybe a wedding market. And then we also figured that there was a market for like large family gatherings and corporate retreats. So organizations renting it for their own purposes. And then the fallback plan was, here's the conservative scenario, we'll just have it on Airbnb and VRBO and see what happens. And so it got enough traction on Airbnb and VRBO to kind of cover the cost, but then we ran these other experiments to figure out, well, what's the upside opportunity? And so one theme is like, I'm actually super conservative in everything I do. I would never quit a job to step into something that hasn't been proven. So my philosophy is always like, you stay you have your foundation, then you build an experiment for what could be next. And then when it proves that there's some success, you maybe invest more time or energy into it, right? So that's always my thing. It's like a conservative position. I'm not a risk taker. I mean, that's just like that's core to who I am. I never have taken a risk where I've like put a bunch of money into something to see if it works. It's just not how I operate. So anyway, so we bought the property, ran those experiments, found that there's not really a market for wellness retreats. They're hard to make money on. The corporate stuff was sort of not quite right because it's too small of a house for that. But the wedding market is huge. And so then we said, okay, well, how do you, and this is where, and I talk about this in the book, the innovation is like most people, there's a market for weddings, okay? Most weddings are you rent a venue and you pay a wedding venue fee, and then the wedding venue tries to upsell you catering, bar, all that stuff. And then weddings get super expensive. And so our innovation on this, and I won't sort of drag out how we got there, was really like, let's package this whole house for 4 nights, put a higher kind of price point on it, and make it a do-it-yourself wedding venue. So we'll fill a shipping container with decor, chairs, candelabras, tea lights, just stuff that you would want, silverware plates, everything that you need for 70 people. We'll give you exclusive use of the house. You can stay there because there's 7 bedrooms. You can stay there for 4 nights and then host a wedding. And so for us, and by the way, like we have keyless entry. So it's like, we just send you the 4-digit code, and your wife, full disclosure, Taryn, is really the one that helps manage the marketing engine on this. And people pay, a higher fee for what it would otherwise be on Airbnb, but a discount for what they would otherwise be paying for all those sort of things a la carte. So that was the innovation, was like, you get a wedding house for a weekend for a fixed rate, and then you can have a do-it-yourself wedding for 70 people. And that model doesn't require us to have any full-time staff. We have a cleaning crew that turns in and turns out. We have a woman that manages our marketing. We have a woman that manages sort of the physical house itself, maintenance crews and stuff like that. And it's been a good, it's been a good little business, and it's passive. It's not entirely passive. It takes a little bit of time, but once you set that model up, and have all the right attributes in place, it kind of runs itself. And it's a great service to the people that are renting it for their weddings. They have amazing experiences, and they have a lot of creativity. So do it yourself is either like, it's us not having to do a lot, is true, but it's also them having the creativity to design exactly what they want for those 3 days, and being able to have a rehearsal dinner, and then the wedding, and then a brunch, and a photo shoot, and families stay there. So it ends up being a big money saver for them. So there's probably more on that. I guess one other piece, I viewed my role with that business as, you're really designing just all the interaction points. So once, I found this boutique marketing agency in Minneapolis, and all they do is build funnels for wedding venues. So that was an important piece that we plugged in on the front end. I found, Taryn and I had a conversation about how she could help sort of just manage the inflow of bridal requests. So every time someone came through the funnel and downloaded the brochure, it went to Taryn. She scheduled the tour. And then I had sort of a house manager sort of on point, and then, landscaping crews and all that stuff. So it's more about putting those pieces in place. And once those pieces are in place, then the thing kind of, runs itself. But that's sort of the short story. I'm sure there's more.
Yeah, no, that's it's really interesting. It's really cool. I think a lot of people would be interested in this, because you created this whole business around real estate. Number one, that you bought a solid investment, and then you experimented, figure out what was the highest and best use of it. But you did all this while having a very full-time job, multiple full-time jobs. And it was, like you said, you put the components in place, and that gave you the ability to get this, to get the best financing terms, and to do to set it up in a way that, if you had left your job, it would have been a struggle. You couldn't have experimented as much. You would have needed to drive revenue immediately, and made very different decisions. So I think it's a perfect example of being that third shift entrepreneur. And so if somebody else wants to do something similar to this, because this model is growing, and especially I think after COVID, people want to get outside of cities and get away to bigger properties. And I think wedding venues are changing quite a bit as well. So what's your advice, I guess? Has it worked out, from a financial standpoint, has it worked out similar to what you thought? And then what are some things that you would recommend keeping in mind?
Yeah. So financially, I'd say it's worked out. It's worked out better than probably what we thought. I would say, if I'm honest, like we didn't buy this with the goal of operating a wedding venue.
Yeah.
But this is again where you got to have that open kind of disposition around the thing that you're building.
Observing the pull. Yeah.
observing the poll. I was like, look, this is what the people want.
That's
Give the
right.
people what they want. So so that's really it. And like, frankly, in time, and I'm actually like hosting a third shift entrepreneur retreat at the end of August. If you go to thirdshiftentrepreneur.com, you can sign up for the retreat.
At Emerson House?
At Emerson House.
Awesome.
So I will get to my vision in time, but I don't want my vision to get in the way of a good business model, and I just think that that's like a really important thing is like, I really love the house. I love Northwest Indiana. I love what this property is. I'm going to be a little bit agnostic about what the use of it is. Let the market dictate that. The market wants weddings. And that buys me time to kind of figure out how to activate this retreat model. We at one point tried to build additional tiny homes around the property that went to zoning. The zoning board shot it down. So, it's like there's bumps in the road, but this is again where we have we can be patient with this whole model and not feel like all of our eggs are in one basket. And it's not more than, I don't know, 5-10 hours of my time in a given week. Sometimes it's no hours. Some weeks it's maybe 10-20 hours, but that allows us to sort of strategically know that we can slow roll this and really get it right and say no to certain things. I mean, part of what, a decision that you have to make is like, are we going to open up for Airbnb weekends in the summer? Or are we going to kind of go in on this idea that they're going to get booked with weddings? And so now we've got bookings out to, I think, 2023. But again, being able to be patient with this whole process has really worked. And so my advice to people is, get out there, open a wedding venue, hopefully nowhere near Porte, Indiana. No. But yeah, there's lots of opportunities in real estate. And I think that I would just encourage, I don't know. I mean, for us, the do-it-yourself model is nice because if you have to have full-time staff, that's just a whole different cost infrastructure that I think people underestimate. So people come in and this is where I think you got to be clear-eyed, because you come in and really the house is built as a bed and breakfast. So people are like, oh, you can have this awesome bed and breakfast. Okay, but if it's a bed and breakfast, you're pricing 7 rooms by the night, and maybe let's just go generous and say it's $200 a night for a room. And let's say you book all 7 rooms. Well, that's $1,400. And you have to have staff. You're dealing with 7 individual customers. You're needing to book all that. Whereas you sort of having this as a whole home rental, private for weddings as an event, you can sort of just have a much different price point with so much less complexity. I mean, very little complexity. So I think about the complexity and don't let falling in love with what could be, because you can imagine at this place in particular, because it was this really beautiful bed and breakfast with like perfect little meals and like there's a spa downstairs, and like experientially that's really special. But from a business model standpoint, it's tons of complexity and not nearly as a strong business model. That's my sense.
Yeah. And I think that's a lot of entrepreneurs run into that because they fall in love with the idea that they have of what it should be. I just recently, as you're talking about that, it jogged my memory around this. I just went to a variance meeting for Porter County where I am. And there was a owner of a wedding venue there. It's a winery and a wedding venue. And I was asking them about their business, and they have a similar model. They don't have lodging, but they have the wedding venue, and they're sold out Thursday, Friday, Saturday for sure, every single weekend. They had like 60 weddings booked this summer. And, I was running the rough numbers and I'm like, wow, those are incredible numbers. And then they told me they show up at 8:00 in the morning to meet the bride. They're there all day long, making sure the flowers are delivered right, everything's set up right. Like they're basically a wedding planner. And then they leave after midnight when the wedding has to shut down, and they're there at 8:00 the next morning to meet the bride again. And so she's explaining this to me, and I'm thinking, man, if you knew the model Todd's using, you'd probably throw this out, because your life is just, I mean, you might make a little bit more money that way, but you got to think about the dollars for time aspect too, and use, use the smartest strategy, keep experimenting until you come to the strategy that matches your lifestyle as well.
I think that's so important, Kirby. And because our starting point for this is minimize our time. That's like number one, it's like number one is minimize our sort of time and involvement.
Mm-hmm.
Number two is maximize the profitability of the property. And then, number three is like maybe like total gross revenue, but that's like the least meaningful of. And so it's interesting how a lot of people are pursuing gross revenue and they haven't actually considered their own time and capacity or the margins themselves. And so it's, so being really clear on the goal of the business. And frankly, for us, it's like less complexity. So even if we could, jam 2 weddings into a weekend, we wouldn't do it, So I think I do think it's being really clear on what those kind of micro goals are within the thing. And for us, it's also about like we just had 4th of July there and we had a huge family reunion. So like, nice. That's as much a part of what this is, for us and really that it's a long-term, it's a long-term investment. We'll have it for hopefully, 10, 20, 30 years, however long we want, and then, sell it and it's on to the next. But there's a lot of, I think thinking about your own personal time and commitment and involvement with it is a big part of this. And here's the thing with do it yourself. If people don't have something, if something's not right, they're not calling you and blaming you, So it's, and especially with the market of brides, because that's a high stress event, it's really like, it just puts all the onus on them and they appreciate that. Right. Yeah. And it kind of keeps us out of the conversation. So yeah.
That's awesome. So I know we're getting short on time. So last question here. You're involved in a lot of things. For those listening who don't know Todd, he's got a background in politics, ran for office at one point, was a congressional page for a year in high school. So now you're an author. You built an incredibly powerful nonprofit that's helped so many people. What's next for you? Where are you going from here? What's your goal?
Man, my goal, I think about, I'm not driven by money. I just want to say that, like, it's not what's interesting to me. What I am driven by is the ability to cultivate a portfolio of things that are of interest to me and causes that are important to me. And so military veterans and helping people start businesses is important to me. And so I want more time for that. Helping Northwest Indiana become a little bit more progressive is important to me. So I'm spending some time on that. In leadership and development, this stuff is important to me. So it's probably, there's a portfolio of things that I'm curating, like in any other season. I'm helping launch an organization called Veterans for Political Innovation. And it's about implementing a better election system that I think will lead to less polarized and paralyzed politics. And so I think our country is like, I've been asking myself, it's like, how do we fix our democracy? Because I think it's in a bad place and we need to do better and we can do better. So I get frustrated by that. So I'll be spending a lot of time on that. But for me, it's never going to be, I've reconciled for myself, it's not about doing one thing. It's about having a few things going. And I think being involved in a few things for me helps me show up in better ways, I think, for those various efforts. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, the book is Third Shift Entrepreneur. Todd is living the third shift entrepreneur life. He wrote the book. Where's the best place to buy it?
You get it off Amazon, which is, I don't know if I want to be promoting Amazon, but Barnes & Noble, a million books, and hopefully nice. In time, local booksellers as well. But thanks for the opportunity to be with you, Kirby. And I just, to everyone who's listening, I commend you. I encourage you. Real estate. I talk a lot about, assessing your financial floor. I think your financial floor, as well as your emotional floor, a lot of that can come from real estate. So I think what you're doing is important. I think having more people level up into the middle class, create wealth for themselves and their families, and not for the sake of wealth, but for the sake of generational stability, family stability, which hopefully leads to more impact in our communities and better lives lived for more people, I think is important. And I think this is a pathway that is available. So I'm glad that you're helping illuminate what's possible.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. And we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Kirby.
Thanks.